Let's talk about the hot and cold behavior of avoidance, and let's rip the mask right off. You think you're being rejected. You think it means they're done, over it, or worse, that you were never enough. But that interpretation, that's surface level. That's what people believe when they only understand relationships on the visible layer. You're not dealing with someone who's simply lost interest. You're dealing with someone who's battling themselves, and you're standing right in the crossfire. See, avoidants aren't cold because they don't care. They're cold because they care more than they can handle. That's the paradox. That's the thing no one tells you. Because our society still teaches us to view love as linear. But avoidant attachment isn't linear. It's chaotic, defensive, and reactive. It's not a straight line. It's a warpath paved with fear. When an avoidant gets close to you, when they feel intimacy forming, their nervous system registers that closeness as a threat. It doesn't feel safe, even if it's loving, even if you're the most patient, kind, consistent person they've ever known. That's what makes this dynamic so confusing for you. You give more love, thinking it'll bring them closer. You offer warmth, thinking it will melt the distance. But love doesn't soothe the nervous system that's wired to perceive closeness as danger. It triggers it. So they pull back, they shut down, they disappear, and you're left wondering what you did wrong. But here's the truth. You didn't break anything. You touched something in them that was already broken. Most avoidants come from backgrounds where love came with conditions, where vulnerability wasn't safe, where emotional needs were met with criticism, suffocation, or abandonment. So now, in adulthood, even though they crave intimacy, they've learned to survive by avoiding it. Connection equals threat. Dependency equals weakness. So the moment they start to feel emotionally dependent on you, the walls go up. It's not calculated. It's not manipulation. It's a reflex, a subconscious survival mechanism. And yet, here's the most mind-blowing part. Even as they push you away, they still want to be close. They still feel the pull. They still want your presence, your energy, your love. They just don't know how to stay regulated inside of it. This is what makes them hot and cold. This is why one day they're leaning in and the next day they vanish. You're witnessing a person torn between their deepest longing and their deepest fear. Desire and danger, all wrapped up in the same experience. When an avoidant gets close to someone they care about, it activates both their heart and their trauma. And what you see as inconsistency is really the visible symptom of that invisible war. Their desire says, hold them tighter. Their trauma screams, run before it hurts. And now you're sitting there confused, doubting yourself, questioning your worth, all because you were handed a broken love language and told to make sense of it. But here's what I want you to understand. The hot and cold isn't proof they don't love you. It's proof they don't yet know how to love safely. Because true love, for them, isn't the absence of fear. It's learning to stay present, even when the fear is there. But that takes healing. That takes a nervous system upgrade. That takes someone recognizing their own patterns and being brave enough to sit with the discomfort instead of running from it. So what do you do when someone acts like this? You stop personalizing their fear. You stop letting their cold behavior redefine your self-worth. And most importantly, you recognize that their pattern doesn't mean you're unlovable. It means they're unequipped to love consistently. They're not rejecting you, they're rejecting the intensity of what they feel for you. You can hold that truth in your heart. You'll stop chasing, stop doubting, and start seeing clearly. You'll stop calling the coldness cruel and start calling it what it really is. A trauma response in the disguise of detachment. Maybe, just maybe, instead of blaming yourself, you'll begin to realize that you were never too much. They were just never taught how to stay. Now let's dive deeper into the part almost everyone misinterprets, the so-called cold phase. You think when the avoidant pulls back, it means they're done. you assume the silence is indifference, that the distance is final. But that assumption is exactly why people sabotage their chances of ever understanding avoidant love. Because what feels like rejection is often observation. What feels like abandonment is sometimes a test. Avoidants don't trust easily, not because they're arrogant, but because their attachment blueprint has been shaped by emotional volatility. Somewhere along the line, they learned, when I get close to people, I lose something. Maybe my freedom, maybe my peace, maybe even myself. So what happens when they start to genuinely care about you? They don't lean in, not at first, they lean out. And then they watch. They watch how you respond to their absence. And this is where most people fail the test without even realizing what was happening. They beg, they chase, they panic. They try to force connection back to life, thinking love means always staying close. But here's the twist. For an avoidant, closeness is the threat. So when you chase, you don't calm their nervous system, you spike it. You don't prove love, you validate their fear that intimacy equals loss of control. Now, I know that might sound frustrating, even unfair. Why should you have to pass a test to be loved? But this isn't about playing games. It's about survival mechanisms. An avoidant pulls back not to punish you, but to protect their own emotional safety. And in that pullback, they're subconsciously searching for evidence. Can I trust this connection? Will you respect my need for space? Will you stay grounded even when I retreat? And that's the irony most people miss. The coldness you resent, it's often a subconscious audition for emotional safety. They want to know, can you hold your center without pulling them out of theirs? Can you stay present without chasing? Can you love them without smothering them? That's the test. Because let's be brutally honest, avoidants don't believe closeness is safe. So they manufacture distance to prove to themselves that you're not going to violate their boundaries. If you collapse during the test, if you become anxious, aggressive, overly emotional, you've unknowingly confirmed their worst fear, that love always ends in chaos, that people only love when you comply, not when you retreat. But when you don't react to their distance, when you remain calm, collected, and emotionally regulated, you send a powerful subconscious signal, I'm safe. I don't need to control you to love you. That's what breaks the cycle. That's what rewires their narrative. See, people think love is proven in closeness, but with an avoidant, love is revealed in how you handle their space. They're not watching how you love them when things are good. They're watching how you hold yourself when they disappear. Do you crumble? Or do you hold steady in the storm of their silence? Because here's what's wild. That calm, self-respecting response, that's what makes them come back. That's what earns their trust. That's when they realize this person doesn't need to own me to care about me. That's when their walls start to loosen. And make no mistake, they do feel deeply. They do want connection, but only with someone who doesn't confuse love with possession. Only with someone who can honor their rhythm without demanding emotional conformity. You don't win an avoidant's heart by demanding access. You earn it by being someone who doesn't need it to feel whole. So when the cold phase comes, and it will, don't panic. Don't personalize it. See it for what it is. A trauma-trained system scanning for safety. And your job is not to fix them, chase them, or prove your love louder. Your job is to become the calm in their storm. The one who doesn't flinch. The one who doesn't abandon yourself in order to be chosen. And maybe, just maybe, in that stillness, they'll finally believe they've found something they've never had before. Love that doesn't suffocate, it sets them free. Let's talk about the silence, the part that messes with your mind the most. When an avoidant goes quiet, it feels like erasure. Like all those warm moments, all those vulnerable glimpses just disappeared into thin air. You wonder if it ever meant anything. You question your worth. You spiral in your head because silence, in our world, is often equated with indifference. But that equation doesn't apply here. With an avoidant, silence doesn't mean they've stopped thinking about you. It often means they're thinking about you constantly, but in a way that's locked behind fear, confusion, and emotional paralysis. You just don't see it because they've been trained either by childhood, heartbreak, or trauma to internalize their emotions and protect their vulnerability at all costs. When they go cold, what's happening on the inside is wildly different from what you're experiencing on the outside. You feel distance, you feel rejection. But they're often consumed by mental noise, replaying what was said, analyzing what they felt, obsessing over what you meant, trying to decode why something that felt so good terrifies them so deeply. It's like their brain and body go into lockdown. Not because they don't care, but because they care more than they know how to process. Understand this. The avoidance nervous system treats connection like a foreign invader. Their body doesn't interpret love as safety. It interprets love as exposure, emotional nudity. And the more they feel, the more that internal alarm system goes off. So what do? They retreat. They go into hiding. Not to erase you, but to manage the storm you unintentionally activated inside of them. And here's where it gets deep. Many avoidants grew up in environments where emotions were dangerous. Vulnerability meant being manipulated, abandoned, or controlled. So as adults, they don't know how to just sit with love. They either want to devour it or escape it. That's the hot and cold. That's the intensity and withdrawal. That's the constant push and pull. Not because they're playing games, but because you've awakened something real inside someone who's terrified of real. Now here's the part no one talks about. While you're pacing the room, wondering why they're silent, they're wondering why they can't stop thinking about you. But instead of reaching out, they shut down, they suppress. Because they've been conditioned to believe that their emotions are a liability, and deep down, many of them are terrified that if they do express how they feel, they'll lose control, or worse, they'll lose you. That's the cruel irony. Avoidants don't stay silent because they're cold. They stay silent because their feelings have overwhelmed them. They don't have the emotional tools yet to process affection in a way that doesn't feel threatening. So they go dark, they vanish. And in doing so, they're not just pulling away from you, they're pulling away from their own emotional chaos. And this is the trap for you. You take that silence and write a story with it. You assume they don't care, that they've moved on, that they never felt what you felt. But their silence isn't the absence of emotion, it's the presence of too much emotion, all tangled up in fear. And if you could see what was happening behind the scenes, you'd stop asking, why did they ghost me? And start asking, what did I awaken in them that they're not ready to let that sink in? Your presence didn't push them away. It triggered an emotional earthquake inside them. And they weren't ready for that level of depth, honesty, and vulnerability. That's not your failure. That's their unhealed story surfacing. And the only reason they're this shaken is because they felt something real. She wants to know if they're thinking about you during the silence. Yes, but it's not always in words or fantasies. It's in tension, in confusion, in the unspoken, in the way your absence creates pressure in their mind, but their patterns won't let them act on it yet. That's the paradox of avoidant love. The more they feel, the less they speak. The stronger the bond, the more it frightens them. And the deeper their need for you, the more likely they are to run. Because you represent something their nervous system was never taught to handle. Safe, genuine, present connection. But don't let their silence write your story. Don't let their pause make you question your value. Their mind may be a prison, but you are not the one holding the key. Sometimes silence isn't distance, it's emotional overwhelm. And in that quiet, they're not forgetting you. They're fighting a battle you were never meant to lose. Let's make one thing absolutely clear. This hot and cold behavior that avoidants show you, it's not a personality flaw. It's not a manipulative game. It's a survival pattern. That's where the real shift in understanding happens. You're not dealing with someone who just doesn't know what they want. You're dealing with someone whose entire emotional operating system is built around avoiding pain, not pursuing pleasure. They've learned to equate closeness with danger. And not because they're dramatic, but because somewhere in their past, closeness did hurt them. Maybe it was a parent who smothered their boundaries. Maybe it was a caregiver who withdrew love as punishment. Maybe it was years of feeling like their emotional needs made them a burden. Whatever it was, they learned early that being seen wasn't safe. So now when they feel vulnerable, exposed, or emotionally activated, they don't lean in like someone with secure attachment might. They freeze, they retreat, they default to what protected them when they were younger. Distance. Now, fast forward to today. They meet you, you're consistent, you show up, you offer love that's not chaotic, and for a moment they let themselves believe maybe, just maybe, this time is different. So they open up, they lean in, you see glimpses of who they really are. And then suddenly, they pull back. They disappear emotionally, maybe even physically. That's when you start spiraling, thinking they're losing interest, playing games, or worse, replacing you. But here's the real kicker. The moment they pulled back, that was the moment they felt the most. That was the moment their nervous system screamed, this is getting dangerous. You're about to get hurt. Run. You have to understand the survival pattern of an avoidant isn't logical. It's automatic. It's wired into their body. Their withdrawal isn't calculated. It's reflexive. It's just like touching a hot stove. You don't think, you pull away. That's what you're witnessing. You're not seeing someone making a conscious decision to sabotage love. You're seeing someone whose entire body is programmed to disconnect the moment intimacy feels too intense. And this is where it gets even deeper. That push-pull dynamic you keep getting trapped in, that inconsistency you're trying to decode, that's the nervous system doing its job. One moment, they crave the connection, they want you, they lean into the warmth, but as soon as that warmth becomes too real, too consistent, too safe, it becomes threatening. Because deep down, their internal story still says, when I get close, I get hurt. That's why they don't respond to logic. That's why telling them I'm not here to hurt you doesn't calm them down. Because their fear isn't intellectual, it's primal, it lives in the body, not in the brain. And here's the mistake most people make. They try to love the avoidant out of their fear. They try to give more, prove more, chase more. But love, when delivered with pressure, becomes another threat. It's not your fault. You think you're offering connection, but they experience it as intrusion. That's what makes this pattern so heartbreaking. Because both people in the dynamic are often hurting, confused, and misinterpreting the other's actions. You're trying to connect, they're trying to survive. You think their pullback is apathy, they think their pullback is protection. And here's the truth you've got to internalize. Their avoidant behavior doesn't mean they don't care. It means they don't know how to care and feel safe at the same time. Their coldness is camouflage. Their silence is a self-soothing strategy. Their distance is an outdated defense mechanism trying to protect them from a threat that no longer exists but still feels real. So stop viewing their inconsistency as a reflection of your value. It's not about you. It's about the emotional blueprint they're stuck in. And the only way they'll break it is by facing it, not by you forcing it. You didn't cause their pattern and you won't cure it. But what you can do is recognize it. Detach from taking it personally. Stand in your own emotional maturity. And most importantly, never shrink yourself to make room for someone who's still afraid of love. Because sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone stuck in survival is refuse to join them in the war they're waging against themselves. Their inconsistency isn't rejection, it's a nervous system on autopilot. And you were never the danger, just the invitation they weren't ready to accept. Now let's get brutally honest about one of the most confusing parts of this entire dynamic. Why avoidants go cold after they've gotten close. You'd think that the more emotionally connected you get with someone, the safer they'd feel, the more consistent they'd become. That's the logical expectation, right? You're getting closer, you're bonding, you're building trust. So why, right when it feels like the connection is deepening, they retreat? That's where most people get blindsided, because it defies emotional logic. You think, wait, weren't we just getting somewhere? Weren't we finally breaking through? And then silence, distance, emotional frost. You go from intimacy to emptiness almost overnight. But here's what you need to understand on a deeper level. For an avoidant, the closer they get to you, the more activated their fear becomes. Their withdrawal isn't a sign of lost interest. It's a direct result of increased emotional intensity. And that's the paradox. The more they feel, the more they run. This is not about disinterest. It's about dysregulation. Avoidants don't get overwhelmed by boredom. They get overwhelmed by closeness. Their love doesn't fade after connection. It floods them. And because they don't know how to sit with that flood, they shut it down. They freeze. They deactivate their feelings, not because they're fake, but because they're too real, too strong, too raw. Imagine this. Their nervous system is like a smoke detector that's been programmed to go off not when there's fire, but when there's warmth. That's how distorted their internal safety system has become. So the moment they feel too close, too emotionally seen, too vulnerable, they hit the eject button. Not because internally they're screaming, this is too much, I'm losing control. The deeper they fall for you, the more dangerous you feel. Not because you are dangerous, but because their entire past is whispering, if you love this person, they will destroy you. That's how powerful their emotional programming is. Love equals loss. Closeness equals danger. Connection equals pain. These aren't conscious thoughts. They're somatic memories, imprints. And when the avoidant starts catching real feelings, those imprints take over. This is why they may even sabotage the relationship when things are going well. You interpret it as rejection, betrayal, confusion, but for them, it's not about the relationship at all. It's about survival. Because emotional intimacy to an avoidant isn't a safe space. It's a battlefield. And love for them is not just vulnerability, it's emotional exposure. So what do? They create distance. They might go quiet. They might pick a fight. They might suddenly say they need space or that they're confused. It's not always rational, but it's strategic. Because to their subconscious mind, if I don't get too close, I won't get hurt. They're not trying to destroy what you've built. They're trying to protect themselves from how deeply it matters. This is the tragedy of avoidant love. You think the emotional high brought you closer. But for them, it created an emotional spike they couldn't regulate, so they shut it all down. And that shutdown doesn't mean the love disappeared. It means the love grew too loud, louder than their capacity to manage. And this is where you've got to rise above the confusion and see what's really going on. You didn't do anything wrong. You didn't get too close in a toxic way. You didn't love too hard or push too fast. You simply touched a part of them that they've never allowed anyone to access. And the fear of that vulnerability triggered a full system alert. The distance they create after connection isn't a rejection of you. It's a retreat from themselves, from their feelings, from the possibility that this might actually be real. And if it's real, they could lose it. And if they lose it, they won't survive it because they disappear first. Not because you're wrong, but because you're right in a way they don't know how to handle yet. And here's the bottom line. When someone pulls away right after intimacy, don't mistake that as a sign that your love wasn't real. Sometimes it's the most real love that scares someone enough to run. They don't retreat because they don't feel something for you. They retreat because they finally do. Let's strip away the illusion once and for all. Avoidants don't express love the way you're used to. They won't flood you with I miss you texts. They won't pour their heart out in perfectly timed confessions. They won't chase you down the hallway crying, asking you not to leave. Not because they don't care, but because their version of love speaks an entirely different language, and it's one most people never learn to translate. Their love doesn't come through words. It doesn't come through grand romantic gestures. It comes to a conflicted dance of distance and yearning. A pattern that looks like resistance, but underneath it all, it's a signal, a cry, a quiet, desperate way of saying, I care about you more than I can handle. That's what most people miss. They see the avoidance, the inconsistency, the hot and cold, and they label it as indifference. They call it selfish, emotionally unavailable, toxic, but those are surface level labels slapped onto something much deeper. A heart that wants connection, trapped inside a body, trained to fear it. You want them to say, I love you, but what if I told you that their love isn't in their words, it's in their behavior when they think you're gone? What if I told you that the moments they seem most distant are the moments they're actually most invested because they're trying to survive the emotional pull they feel toward you? Here's the real shocker. Avoidants often show they care by pulling away. I know that sounds completely backwards, but that retreat isn't always about escape. It's about emotional preservation. It's the only way they know how to manage the intensity of what they feel. You are too important, and that importance scares them. So they create space, not to disconnect from you, but to protect themselves from drowning in their own emotion. They might not reach out when they miss you, but they replay every interaction. They might not say they're hurt, but they shut down when they fear you've stopped caring. They might not beg you to stay, but they won't fully let you go either. Their love lives in the pauses, in the hesitation, in the moments where they seem torn between running and staying. That tension, that conflict, that's where the love is hiding. Most people think love is about constant presence. But for the avoidant, love often emerges through absence, through the silence they hate but can't break, through the pull they resist but can't ignore, through the guilt they feel for needing space and the ache they feel when you finally give it to them, because in that space they realize something. They don't want to lose you, but they also don't know how to keep you without losing themselves. That's the tragedy and the miracle of avoidant love. The love is there.